Welcome back. Today's guest is a board certified pediatrician who holds a master's degree in epidemiology. He practices integrative and functional pediatric medicine, blending conventional care with holistic wellness and preventative perspectives. He is an author of multiple books, including Between a Shot and a Hard Place, tackling difficult vaccine questions with balance, data, and clarity. His motto, not pro, not anti, just the facts. My guest today, Dr. Joel Gator Warsh.
Thank you for having me on.
Thanks so much for for coming on, brother. And I hope it's okay if I call you brother. I feel that that kinship in you
Definitely.
because you when I was on my journey of just opening up my mind and seeing what was out there in medical space, I I kept coming across people who were super polarized, and that's definitely not how I was. I wasn't one side or the other. I just wanted to figure out what the facts were and do more research. And that's where I found you, and I feel like that's where you're grounded in. So I appreciate you, man, for coming on today. And um, just to get started, I do want to ask about, like, how did you decide that you wanted to be a pediatrician, and like how and when did integrative functional medicine, like when did that enter your worldview, well, wanting to become a pediatrician?
Yeah, that's a great place to start. And I guess, thanks for talking about this. Obviously, vaccines are a controversial topic. It shouldn't be, but it is. And, I'm glad that we're able to talk about it now. It wasn't something we could seemingly talk about so much, even in recent history, but it seems like a lot better now, and a lot more people are interested in it. And I never thought I'd be here. I never thought I'd be writing a book about vaccines. I never thought I'd be chatting so much about vaccines, but here we are. And I guess if you go back, in terms of pediatrics, I always loved working with kids. I used to coach my brother in hockey and baseball and really enjoyed that. And then worked in some summer camps and loved doing that. So I always loved working with kids. And when I love science, so I decided to become a doctor. And when I went there, it was always to work with kids. I never really loved working with the adults so much, and I like getting ahead of things. And I thought the kids are just more fun to be around. Now the visits are more fun. So that was just always the way that it was. It was always that way for me. I didn't go to med school to become anything but a pediatrician, but I didn't grow up, I would say, particularly holistic. I would say pretty healthy, but nothing that was really on my mind as a child or growing up. I would say really meeting my now wife during residency and training. She was very holistic minded, and so that certainly opened up my eyes to a different world, and eating a little bit differently and being more mindful of what I was eating, and certainly I felt better after doing that. And so that kind of pushed me in that direction. I started doing some courses on functional medicine and integrative medicine, and of course, when you're in standard medical training, which I was at the time, I was at Children's Hospital LA, which is a extraordinarily Western, top Western program. And there's the only thing you really hear about in terms of integrated medicine is this kind of woo woo and out there. And going through some of these courses that you had to do on your own, you're like, wait, what? Like, this is so not woo woo at all. It's so common sense. Like, why are we not learning about this? Why are we not learning about root cause? Why are we not learning about nutrition? Like, these things are super important, and there's nothing woo woo about it. So I kind of gravitated to that, enjoyed it, and started doing it in my practice. And it's been really enjoyable to do that. But what you realize very quickly when you go into integrative medicine is a lot of people have questions about vaccines, and want to talk to you all about vaccines. And that was not something I was really aware of back then, but that became very quickly apparent. And also it became very apparent very early on that I knew very little about vaccines and really couldn't answer the questions and just didn't really know. So I had to do my own research because we don't learn that much about vaccines in training. And so I got to learn more through the years, and got to learn more through the parents' questions. But as we mentioned, it's very censored, and you couldn't really talk about it outside the office, or it was hard to, unless you want to get censored. And then COVID hit, and I think everyone got super frustrated with everything, and it kind of pushed me over the edge to say, like, I do want to talk about this. I do think we need to talk about it, and I don't feel like there's a lot of balanced resources out there, and that's what led me to write the book. And I wasn't sure how that was going to go, but luckily, I guess for this topic, it's a little less censored now, so it's been actually very pleasant so far, and it hasn't been crazy, which I thought it was going to be, and people are super interested to chat about it. So I guess that's what brought me here.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. I was definitely a conventional medicine, grew up in allopathic medicine. You know, my mom was a nurse, so like a pill for anything. And my wife is actually the one who kind of showed me the holistic way. And I'll ask you this because since then I have definitely become maybe a little bit more holistic than her. Has that happened for you as well?
Oh, I don't know if I'm more holistic than her, but I would say, I mean, I think she's still a little bit more than me, but I, I still have much more of the Western minded
Yeah.
training and came. So I'm a lot more holistic than I was for sure. But she's pretty holistic minded, from the start, and not in like in a woo woo weird way. Just like, she's always, she grew up eating healthy, fresh food, exercise. She used to teach yoga. She just thought about this her whole life. So it's like she's already there, and I've kind of moved there through life.
Yeah, that's awesome. And in like in your practice, just to give us like a quick example, what does it look like for to show the difference between what a pediatric patient might experience when they're coming in to your clinic, a functional medicine integrative practice versus a conventional practice.
For me, it may look exactly the same, or it may look very different. It kind of depends on the situation, and it depends on each patient and each situation, because there are some things that modern medicine does really, really well, and sometimes you need a medication, and other times you really don't. And I think for me and for visits at the office, it's more of a mindset of, we would like to try to do everything natural first if possible, and medication is a last resort, and I'll use a medication if we need to. And so I think that's the main difference, is just kind of the mentality and the thought that goes around visits, and really, when we're doing a wellness check, it's not just about the basics of what a modern medicine visit might be, which is like 2 3 minutes, but maybe talking a little bit more about food or sleep or exercise. You're trying to talk about prevention if there are issues going on, maybe thinking about some of those things like gut health, a little bit more than you might in a mainstream visit. And for sick visits, a lot of times it's, well, what can we use to support the body during this time, as opposed to just reflexively giving a medication. So maybe a supplement or an herb or something like that parents can do. But also other times you have a bad pneumonia, you need an antibiotic, and that's great that we have those. So it just depends on the situation. But I think it's more focus on prevention and more focus on holistic modalities than just a modern medicine, and trying to balance those two.
Man, I think like for that opinion, you should be the Surgeon General.
Well, I
Like,
mean, it'll probably be Casey, and she shares that.
yeah, 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 for sure. Yeah, for sure. I just, I just think it's so simple to me, and I kind of always understood it as that after I mean, I grew up in it where I became a pharmacist to help people, and I thought that medicine was like the greatest thing ever. Pharmaceutical medicine was the greatest thing ever, and a patient comes in, they get a drug, they get fixed, and that's how it goes, and that system is has ended. You know, we're in a paradigm now where we're starting to see some shifts, and it's really interesting because the kids are sicker than they've ever statistically they're more sick than they've ever been in this country. And so that will be an interesting, what will 10 years from now look like as we try to adopt some of these practices where people, for instance, like my pediatrician, he never mentioned food to my mom. I was lucky enough where my mom just was cooking homemade food, and she just did that anyways, and that was just a part of her life. But we never had those conversations, ever, in the pediatrician's office, and they're definitely not taking place now. I know I have it with my children. I don't have those conversations with my pediatrician. Um, so I'm glad that it's happening, and it's something that's going to be the part of the shift that we see.
Well, I mean, I would say I hope it's part of the shift that we see. I mean, I think that there's no question that it's more. We're talking about it more, which is great. I mean, you mentioned something super important, which is kind of the statistics around health is they're terrible, right? I mean, 75% of adults have a chronic disease, about 50% of kids. The number keeps going up. The rate of autoimmune conditions, cancer, autism, allergies, asthma, everything's skyrocketing. So we have a big problem, and it wasn't something that was really generally discussed. Certainly wasn't something that most people were really aware of until maybe this last year. And whether you like Secretary Kennedy or not, I mean, for sure, the best part of him being there right now is this awareness that has certainly been made around health, and whether you agree or disagree with what he's doing, there's no question you haven't heard about it, and you're not thinking about health more, and I think that absolutely must be done because we do have to make changes, and again, you can agree or disagree with him or the way that things are going or some of the things that are being changed. I mean, you don't have to agree with everything, but I think we should all agree that we do need change, and ultimately we can disagree on how to get there, but we shouldn't be disagreeing that we need it. And so that to me is the I would say biggest positive is that we're seeing a lot of change and a lot of shakeup, and we need that, and hopefully in the next decade, like you said, we're going to see a lot more positive change. This is not going to be something that's going to be short term, and we're going to continue to see bigger and bigger changes and more of a shift in I guess the political landscape and the way that things are done. Because the first step is for people to be aware so they can make personal changes, but ultimately we need some bigger changes around our food system and our movement and the way the cities are structured and all sorts of things that are kind of big tasks that are not easy to do.
Yeah, it's like the only thing that people on either side of the political spectrum do agree on right now is there needs to be change. Specifically within the healthcare system, you go and ask a Democrat or Republican right now, like, and they'll tell you, yeah, there needs to be, and even the ones who disagree with Bobby, they Secretary Kennedy, they will say they'll be like, yes, I disagree with everything that he's doing, but we do need to get the dyes out of the food, and we do need to have a better, healthier society, and we are sick as a society. So everyone does agree, that change is necessary.
Yeah, I
So,
I think so, and I think that's an important place. And I don't even think that people don't agree on a lot of stuff. I think we do agree on a lot of stuff. I just think that a lot of people don't necessarily
good
agree on
point.
how to get there, and there certainly are some issues that people totally disagree on. But I think a lot of people agree on a lot of things. Even people that are very diametrically opposed, they agree on a lot. They just don't necessarily, maybe even things like dyes and cane sugar or sugar for high fructose corn syrup. It's like I think everyone agrees that those are just not great for you, but they don't necessarily agree on the priority list of where those should be or how we should make those changes or whether those changes are even that important. And I think that that's where we kind of differ right now. And ultimately, we need to kind of get on the same page and be like, well, some of these things are more minor, some are major. The ultra processed food obviously is the problem. And whether you change the sugar is not really the issue. Whether you take out the dyes is not really the issue. I mean, it's better if it's not in there. But ultimately, the discussion has to be around changing the food system, and so I think everyone agrees on that, but they just they're like, oh well, why if you're a detractor of candy, like, well, why are you worried about that and not food deserts? And like, well, those things are harder to change, so at least we've started somewhere, but changing the food dyes is not going to make anyone all that much healthier, not really. I think it's a good thing to do, but you want to make a real change, we're going to have more local healthy fresh food availability, change the prices, change the incentives, better farming practices, more availability of local farms. Like that will ultimately have a much bigger effect than will changing red dye 40 to a natural dye in a crappy food. It's like small wins, but not a huge, not really what is needed for the big change.
We all know how important strength training is for long term health, but it can be hard to know where to start. I was in the same spot a year ago. You want to make sure you're doing exercises right, avoiding injury, and getting results, but it's easy to feel lost without a plan. That's when I found On Target Fitness. At On Target, you get a custom strength program, personalized attention in a small group setting, and the nutrition coaching you need for real lasting change. And the year I've been working out there, I've gotten stronger, more mobile, and more confident. My form has improved, and even something as simple as walking feels better. The group energy keeps me motivated, and every workout is fun. On Target just opened a new location in Kingston. Now you've got even more options to experience their amazing approach. If you're ready for lasting change, head to www.ontargetfit.com and schedule your session today. Yeah, right. No, exactly. And it's kind of neat. I live in New Hampshire. I live in the seacoast of New Hampshire, and it's where New Hampshire is actually positioned pretty uniquely because we're such a small state, and we have some of these like beliefs that are on both sides and definitely of the land conservation of land and using the, farming, the, good practices here. So I think that New Hampshire, could be at the forefront of, some of what happens next in terms of like getting, maybe getting some of this food and more into the schools and making it a very consistent thing. And I know some of the states are already starting to do some of those programs. But in New Hampshire, it's small, so it's an hour and a half to each side, and a lot of people know, so you can make things happen pretty quickly. And so
Hmm.
there's a lot, there's a good community out here of it. So I do hope that food, continues to change. And I think, I mean, it's going to, because it's, we've already started down that path. And I think that it's going to continue down that path. But it will take time, like
Yeah,
you
yeah,
said. And what are the priorities?
exactly. And I mean that's one of the huge, I guess, difficulties with America is it's so big, and you see these European countries where maybe California has more people than the whole country. It's like it's a lot easier to make changes in smaller locations, and so um, maybe some states like New Hampshire will be able to do a lot more, and that can be an example for other places to show that it works. Maybe it's going to have to be more at the local level, but ultimately it has to. I think the more places that can do it, the more we see success, the more it pushes everybody else to be required to do it. So yeah, and that goes back to like again, it's some personal responsibility. Like I think we need some big changes, but also we need some personal changes. Like I think if we saw whatever smaller state make a big change and their health was so much better, it would put a lot of pressure on all the other places to be like, look, they could do it. We need to figure out how to do it. And it's obviously a lot harder for something like I don't know New York or California to make a change versus a smaller location because there's just so many more people and so much more money. It's just more difficult. So, I think places like where you are could really be the beacons of change.
Yeah, it's like when you put in a cool local program. If you put in a good local program in in my town, in my city, and it does well, and it's very easy for that another town to say, "Oh shoot," in the county, not in the county, to say, "Oh shoot, that's pretty cool what they're doing over there. We're going to emulate that," and we have access to those people too who just ran that program because it's a small state, so they can literally drive an hour and go see them. So that's, in California, they might not find it. It might take 6 months for the idea to even trickle out of the farmer's market to be somewhere else, that this is a cool initiative that's taking place.
Definitely, yeah, and so that's just the complication of it, and it's complicated. It's not a simple solution, but ultimately, if we're moving in a better direction, then we're moving in a better direction. Because right now we're not, and we've been going in the wrong direction for a while in terms of chronic disease and our health. So I think that's important, and then that kind of comes back to all that we're talking about with this chronic disease epidemic. Like we have to be able to talk about it. We have to be able to discuss it. We have to be able to put everything on the table and say like, look, like why are kids sicker? And it's obviously not just one thing; it's many things. But when it comes to vaccines, which we know we're talking about, that has to be on the table too. Like it just has to be
Yeah.
something we can discuss, and it doesn't mean it has anything to do with anything. But when you're injecting more and more of a product into our kids, and we have a chronic disease epidemic that's skyrocketing, when you're doing something that affects an immune system, that has to be something on your list of items you're going to research as much as possible to see that it's not causing any issues. And there is more and more concern as we get more and more of these injections that kids are getting. So I think that's not unreasonable for parents to at least have questions about, and they do have questions, and there's more concern than ever. And then you have the recent Henry Ford study, which is very concerning, and it's maybe the best piece of evidence, honestly, that we've had thus far, and one of the better studies, even though people say that it's not, but it really is. And I think we need to take notice of things like that
Tell,
and talk about it.
yeah, tell me why people, tell me why people have such an issue with the study, or why they think that it was conducted, improperly.
Yeah, I mean, have you seen the film yet? I'm just curious if you
I've
can
seen
say.
the film, yes.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so I
So
watched a
yeah,
couple.
what Joel's talking about, guys, Dr. Warsh is talking about is a new film, an inconvenient study that was produced by ICANN. It just just came out on October 3rd, so definitely check it out.
Yeah, all right. So I'll go back a little bit, and then I can kind of run through to the film. So there was so okay, let's go back. So there's a researcher, head of infectious disease, super pro vaccine guy, really educated, super smart guy at Henry Ford, which is in Michigan, one of the top locations for health in the country. Big system, um, really good electronic medical record systems. They got lots of great data, and it was it was decided that he would do a study looking at vaccinated versus unvaccinated kids, which has really not been done, or not very often been done. And so yeah, he agreed to do it. And when he completed the research, which about 18,000 kids, 2,000 unvaccinated, the results were pretty compelling and surprising to him. Most of the chronic conditions were elevated in the kids that were vaccinated pretty significantly in the study, mostly like 2 to 6 times or so the rate. And generally, with a retrospective study, there's always limitations because it's not a prospective trial, but it's oftentimes the best that we have. And they tried to control for it as best as they could, and they did lots of controls, looking at the amount of years that kids were in the data for, or the amount of visits that they had, all the things that have been, or many of the things that have been questioned in the past. And so they did try to do sensitivity analyses for those, and even with those sensitivity analyses, the results stood. And this researcher, um, individual, who he basically, he did the whole thing, he did the whole study, looked at all the research, wrote up the whole paper, uh, and then and then decided not to publish it. And so there was a lot of controversy around that, because it was talked about at some recent Senate hearings and things like that about being researched. But I was like, oh, well, it was never published. So therefore, it's got all sorts of data issues. And it wasn't published because they didn't want to publish it, because it was just such a bad study. And the film really helps to get an understanding of what really happened, which I think is really important, because you really get a sense, because there's hidden camera footage of the author, who was basically saying, like, look, I just don't want to publish it. Like, it's going to ruin my career, and I'm pretty much done my career. And, I know that it's going to destroy me. So I just don't want to do it. And that speaks to just the world of vaccine science, which he was right. And I feel bad for him, because he at least agreed to do it, but he just decided he wasn't going to do it. And it's not really that it was hidden by like Henry Ford or anything like that. It just wasn't published because he didn't want to. And this is not a guy who is like, I don't know, not a guy who's like afraid of controversy, which is also crazy when you think about it. Like, this is someone who was really involved in the Flint, Michigan water issues, and kind of brought that up, and was a whistleblower. And he was involved and did a study on hydroxychloroquine in COVID and got destroyed for that. So he's like used to controversy, and this was just too much for him. And he's like, I don't want, I don't want my career to be over and be tarnished. And he's right, it probably would, because I think the problem when you look at the research is pretty good. So if you can't destroy the research, then you have to destroy the person. And I think he was worried about that and just didn't want to do it. So they published the film, they published the secret footage, and this like just came out as we're a couple days ago as we're talking about this. And I think it's really interesting, because that's like a really, really good study. And is it show clear causation, or like a perfect? No, of course not. It's one study, but it should be enough of a signal to say, look, like, this is a pretty good study from a super pro vaccine person. We haven't even had anything at this level of quality before. We need to repeat this. We got to do it in other databases. We got to look prospective. We have to take this to heart, and look, like, we don't want to be causing all these issues. So and it's not about not vaccinating. Like, that's not the issue here. The issue is, if vaccines have some sort of secondary issues or complications, or leading to chronic conditions in some kids, or associated with them, or increasing your risk, we want to know. Don't we want to know about that? Like, it's not because we want to not ever vaccinate a kid. It's because you want to improve things. Like, maybe there's ingredients you could change. Maybe you could change the schedule. Maybe there's some we don't need anymore. I don't know. But like, why are we not able to talk about that? You don't want a kid to die from measles, but you also don't want them to get a chronic condition. Two things can be true, and you can't make them better unless you can even talk about it.
Dude, if we are subjecting the most vulnerable population uh, of our future, this is our future generation, we're subjecting them to this. It is something that should be tested annually, something that should be researched continuously, perpetually, forever. So it never comes out of a study, it never comes out of research. If it's something that we're consistently doing to our most vulnerable population, that's how I see it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, first of all, you would expect it to have the most rigorous possible testing before it hits the market, and that's just not true. When you look at the research, it's just not. What we're taught is really, really very different than what's actually been done, and
Of
it
course,
should.
right? And when you're saying that, you're referring to how, like, we're not actually using inert placebo, within the trials. Was that what you're talking about?
Yeah, correct. I mean, I would expect that if you were putting a new product on the market, it would be subject to the best possible research at all times, and certainly would have originally, and you would expect that it was studied against inert placebos and not other vaccines, because you're getting a relative safety of one vaccine versus another versus absolute, meaning against doing nothing, and we don't have that for almost any of the vaccines on the regular childhood schedule, and that's nuts. And if you look at some of the vaccines, like let's say hepatitis B, you look at the package insert, and it shows 147 patients for 5 days. That's the safety trial that it was licensed based upon. And you're like, that can't possibly be true. You look at that, like, like how could that possibly be true? Like, what? That there's no way. And you look and you look and you don't see anything else. And this is literally in the package insert. And you're like, okay, that can't be true. And then you go read something like Aaron Siri, who's, the main vaccine lawyer who does all these things. And he's like, well, I don't believe that. So I'm going to send in a Freedom of Information Act request. And he did that. And it still, they didn't come back with anything else. So it's like, what? Like, how could you be injecting something into 1 day olds based on that? And I'm not saying it's not safe. I'm not saying if you didn't do 5 or 10 years of research, it wouldn't show that it was safe. I don't know that because it wasn't done. But how can you approve something and give it to babies without doing that? And again, we're past some of those things now. We've been doing it for a long time. We have to at least say, if we're going to approve something new in the future, a new vaccine, new thing, it has to be subject to the best possible research for several years before we're willing to give it to a newborn. Like, there's nothing anti-vax about that. I'm not saying you shouldn't ever do it. I'm just saying, like, I want, if I'm going to inject something into my baby, that it's been studied as best as possible. Sure, there might be things that come up 10 years, 20 years later that we didn't expect. That's part of life. But you should at least have done the best possible research in the first place to make sure that it's safe, because you have a healthy baby and you're injecting something into them. And when you call that woo out there, anti-science, anti-vax, whatever, that's nuts. That's not anti-vax. That's like super pro-science. Just you're just like, you want more science, like more research, more data.
I
That's
went to
it.
school. This is the
Yeah.
reason I went to school. Like, I would say people, I was like, this is the reason that I went to school. I went to school so that I could understand this, so that I could understand this stuff. So when I looked in the package insert and I saw, holy shit, there was only 147 people that this is what this is, and then I could search everywhere, and then I got to look at across all the vaccines and got to see how the safety trials, they weren't done to par. They were never done up to par, and so like people will then think that I'm anti-vaccination, and they have an opinion about me, and it's like, man, that is not what I'm trying to say. I just care about children. I care about for if we the chronic disease epidemic in this country is a real thing. So they'll yell at me and say, oh well, now you're fueling vaccine hesitancy and you're a part of that. And I said, no, that is the about as anti-science as things can come in my book. Is I'm trying to say, let's look at something based on data that exists, that we know exists, that we can talk about today, and people still want to push back.
Right, and what's so nuts about that is the hesitancy is already here, right? Like, nobody's creating hesitancy at this point. Like, people are hesitant because the research doesn't exist and because they're starting to be able to research it themselves and to look and read books and hear people talking about it, and they recognize what actually does exist. And that is why, in general, the most highly educated individuals are the most hesitant, because those are individuals that tend to look at the research themselves, because maybe they had some training in science or research or whatever, and they can actually go look at the primary literature and be like, wait, what? You know, like that's what I did. I didn't have any thoughts about vaccines like, 10 years ago, 15
Same.
years ago. I was like, oh, those are great, great. Vaccines,
Yep.
awesome. Save millions of people. That's what we were taught.
Hmm.
Great. And then when you go look at it, you're like, that can't be true. Right. And again, it's not that I'm not like against the concept of giving someone a vaccine or that it can't protect you or that they don't even protect people. I think that they do. I think that is very clear that there's good benefit from vaccines. The question is at what cost, right? The question is at what is the risk? And when you look at the safety data, it's not there. And the response to that shouldn't be, you're anti-science, you're anti-vax, you're crazy. Don't talk about this. You're feeling hesitancy. The response should be, okay, what's missing, what are people hesitant about, what are they concerned about? Let's get that research and data to acknowledge those things and to see what we find. And if you did the proper research, if you did let's say 10 prospective trials following a bunch of kids, vaccinated versus unvaccinated, for 10 years. You spent that money, you did the work, and at the end of it, all the kids were the same in both groups, didn't have any chronic disease increases, no increase of autism, whatever it is. That's the research that would make people confident to actually do vaccines, and they wouldn't be hesitant. Like, it's not about saying I would never get a vaccine or promote a vaccine or do anything. It's like, no, we have to push to get the proper research, so that way we can understand what the risks versus benefits are, so that way we can make weighted choices and informed consent when we're doing these things, because more isn't always better. And with vaccines, it's just more is better. Do more. Give another one. Let's do a vitamin K and Hep B and RSV in the first couple of days. And it's like, okay, but at what cost? I don't want anybody to get Hep B. I don't want anybody to get RSV. I don't want anybody to die of measles. But I also don't want an explosion of cancer, right? And I don't want to just assume that doing more of these things isn't contributing to things like that in some way. It may very well be, it may not be. I don't know the answer, but I think when you have more and more parents who have the same concerns, they say, my kid was X, Y, and Z on day one, they went to get a vaccine, they're completely different the day after. That's something you should listen to, and you should take those anecdotes and study it, and not just call them anti-vax when they literally are someone who went in to get a vaccine. Like, that's not an anti-vax person. Their story is they feel like a vaccine caused them a problem. So that should be data we should take very seriously.
Let me introduce you to Elevate, a premium functional mushroom company focused on supporting your highest potential. They offer a range of powerful supplements crafted from the finest medicinal fungi designed to naturally enhance your well-being. Elevate carries everything from mushroom tinctures, capsules, and teas to their delicious mushroom-infused coffees. All of their products are made with USA-grown mushrooms and contain only wild medicinal mushrooms, no psychoactive compounds. I personally use their focus tincture every day and love their chai tea blend. It's my go-to for a calming yet energizing boost. Elevate's products support mental clarity, immunity, and overall vitality. They ship nationwide, so whether you're new to functional mushrooms or already a fan, Elevate has something for you. Check them out at shopelevatemushrooms.com, where you will find a detailed description of each product and experience the difference for yourself. Yeah, and a lot of those, it's like a lot of those people, they're left feeling like, oh, why did I make this decision? I wasn't informed to make this decision. And they were pro-vaccine at first. That's why they went in and had their child, do that. I have a couple of friends who have been through, that, and then their children, some type of neuro issue that they've been dealing with for the rest of their lives. And it's something that, like, yeah, we don't know, but we do know that, like, these a lot of the byproducts in these vaccines can cause inflammation, and we know that inflammation at a person who doesn't have a fully functioning immune system, like, what is that going to cause? We don't know, and because we haven't actually taken a look at it. Do you have a lot of do you treat a lot of patients at your practice with that have autism?
I have some for sure. I don't have a ton of kids that I've started with that really have autism, but certainly people have come and swore by it. I mean, I've had taken care of kids with autism that never had a vaccine, so I certainly know that it couldn't be the only factor, and it certainly isn't. I mean, that doesn't make any sense for something that complicated, but people swear by it, so I think they're most likely, for some portion of kids, the vaccine throws them over the edge, but that just hasn't been really studied rigorously yet to really kind of parse that out and what role it does play. And again, that's just another one of those fields and topics which is so controversial, and it's just so ridiculous. I mean, you're taught vaccines don't cause autism. The science is settled. It's been debunked. And then you go look at the research, and you're like, nobody who actually looks at the research themselves would say that the science is totally settled on vaccines and autism. That doesn't make any sense, because most of the vaccines haven't even really been studied for autism. And most of the research is on MMR and thimerosal. So to say that categorically doesn't really make any sense. Like, the answer is we don't know, and we haven't studied it appropriately, and we need to. And if you look at the research, you would conclude that too. I mean, I think it's just not really been done. And most of the people say so strongly the vaccines don't cause autism because the research doesn't show that vaccines cause autism, because it hasn't been studied. So you can say it doesn't, we don't have any research to show that it causes autism, so you say it doesn't. And it's like, that's not the answer. The answer is we don't know. It's not that it don't cause autism, but you haven't studied it. So we need to push for those studies to actually see if it does. I don't know the answer. I don't know whether they do or they don't because we have not done prospective trials. We have not looked at this, and we haven't looked at all vaccines. I mean, almost all the research on MMR, which is just one vaccine amongst many. So that's not really that helpful, and even those aren't prospective. So we haven't not even come close to doing the best kind of research for this question yet.
Yeah, most people too, they would say like you'd struggle to do a prospective study because you're it's not ethical, and it's like
It
I just disagree with that wholeheartedly because we have populations of people who would never take a vaccine, and those people can be matched pretty easily with with children who have taken a vaccine. So there's like the prospective studies could definitely be done.
Yeah, it's just nuts. I mean, it's such a silly, ridiculous perspective to say that. I like you're probably not going to get anytime soon a randomized study because you're not going to force people to do a vaccine that don't want it, and you're not going to get people that you're not going to have people that want vaccines not get them, and that's fine. I understand that, and I understand the ethics around that. But there's no reason you couldn't do a open trial where people can choose. There are plenty of people that would happily volunteer for a vaccine study, and there are plenty of people that don't get vaccinated. And of course, there are confounders there and other factors that, it's not going to be the perfect study, but it's still a really good study and it's still going to be super helpful and you'll still get to see. And like, ultimately the the conclusion will be around the unvaccinated kid and their lifestyle. Is it different or not different than a kid that's vaccinated? But ultimately that's not going to give you the specific conclusion about vaccines. But if unvaccinated kids are a lot healthier, then the question is, okay, why are unvaccinated kids much healthier? So vaccines is what else they're doing. Like, what are they doing that is leading them to have lower rates of autism and autoimmune conditions and chronic disease and whatever it is that you find? That's the question. But like the first step is at least you could study that and see if it's different. If it's not different, it's going to shut everybody up. And if it is different, then you're going to be like, all right, well, what are this half of kids doing that makes them so much healthier? Why are they healthier? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, it would definitely tell us something. It would
Yeah.
definitely tell us something, and the research is worthy. And it's wild that we're not doing it.
Yeah, no, it should be done, and it should be done today. And I mean, it's expensive, so I think that's the problem, big problem. And people don't want to do it, but it's obviously super expensive to do big prospective trials. But it needs to be done. Like that, this
We
is such
spend
a
money on
priority.
dude. When people say it to me, I'm like, "You want me to go show you what we spend money on?
Oh yeah,
I
I'm
can go
I'm
show."
not saying we shouldn't. I think there's no question that we could afford it and we could do it. I'm just saying it
It
costs a
is
lot of money.
expensive, and
So
there for sure, yeah, you do have to think of it. And then sometimes when my perspective is like, we need to study it annually, every single year. This is how it needs to be perpetually studied. I can get why some people, who have been in epidemiology, they push back at me a little bit, and I'm like, okay, I understand it is very expensive to do that, but we still need to at least study it once or a couple of times here, before
yeah,
we can.
we should make some big. I've said this. I said this in the book. Like the Framingham studies, like the big prospective study that they've done on heart disease, and they follow people for generations now. And
Mhm.
we just need something like that. Like we our country needs to fund an autism chronic disease vaccine study. Get in a bunch of kids, follow them forever. As long as you can, enroll a lot of people, and then push other countries to do the same. So that way you have some other comparisons and different studies. And I just think we need to do it. Like you just can't keep having these discussions in a circle and a bunch of people say vaccines are the best thing ever and a bunch of people say vaccines are the worst thing ever and just continue to add more and more and more without actually studying it. Like there's a way to resolve this. We study it. So like it just has to be a big enough priority at this point, and I hope it is, and I think it will. I think before Kennedy is finished, hopefully he gets enough time to do all this stuff, but hopefully he'll get that started, and then hopefully people will see it through because again, it's a big it is a lot of money and it is a big deal and it's not that simple to do because you're going to follow kids forever. You have to follow them up. They got to go in for blood work. They got to get seen. You need a big group of people, and it needs to be a group of people that are going to follow this, for decades probably to make it really useful. So that is a big project that needs a whole division of people to do it. So it's doable if we prioritize it, but it is not simple. So I hope that we are getting to the point where this is a priority and it should be given where we are with chronic disease. And maybe it's just like a chronic disease study, in kids, and like vaccines can be one part of it. But I think that it should be a big enough issue that we should be focused on it and have some sort of big cohort moving forward that we're actually looking at this.
Yeah, I like it. A chronic disease study. Vaccines are a part of it because it is a whole mess of things that are keeping them sick. Now, so I'm curious. Separate of vaccines. With autism, I would you, is there would there be massive benefit? Would you say there would be massive benefit to, what would you think could be the benefit from earlier diagnosis of autism?
No, I mean, anything that you diagnose earlier, obviously, you can get more support earlier, so it can be helpful. But I mean, to me, the big thing with autism at this moment is acknowledging that it's a mixture of environmental and genetics, and not just saying that it's just happening more, because we're better at diagnosing, which I think is complete BS. I mean, obviously we're better at diagnosing it. That's a part of it, but it's just happening so much more, and we have to understand why. So to me, the root cause, the foundation, or the root causes needs to be the focus of our study right now, and we need to be branching out into not just vaccines, but all chemicals and toxins and other factors, and genetics and other things. What are I mean, we have studied some of that, but it's just so complicated. But that has to be a big part of our research, because there are so many kids with autism, so many kids with severe autism, and society is honestly just not prepared for the amount of kids that need full-time care. And yes, there are many kids that get diagnosed with autism that are super functional, super talented. I'm not talking about those kids that are doing great. I'm talking about the ones that are not, and there are plenty of those. And a vast majority of kids with autism are going to have to live with their parents and need full-time support. And society is not built for that. I mean, in California, 1 in 12.5 boys has autism. Like, it's a huge portion of the population, and it keeps growing. And we're talking 1 in 30 or so, and those numbers keep growing. So if you have, let's say, I don't know, 1 in 20 in a few years, like think 20 years from now, like who is taking care of all of these kids when maybe 25% of those kids are nonverbal? That's a big problem. So we have to identify why we're going in this wrong direction, and how we can support those families, and how we can identify what is triggering the severe autism, and try to curb that in some way. And it's not, people want to jump. Maybe it's vaccines. Maybe that's what we need to change, but maybe it's other things too, or probably it's several things. And we got to figure out, like, here are the top 10 things causing severe autism. Let's fix that. That's a big deal.
Yeah, I agree, and I do think that diagnosis, and how I was talking about it, is like the traditional diagnosis. I do think, yeah, it become more prevalent. We've gotten better at it, but I have a group of friends who are working on I want to work on a company called Ignite Biomedical, and they've created they've created it's qualitative AI that allows different disease states to, for instance, if a person has Crohn's disease or colitis, and they're a candidate for Remicade, we know that only 10 to 15% of people are going to respond well to Remicade. The other 85% are going to be treatment non-responders. The only way that we can assess that right now is by giving that person drug for 3 months and then doing a colonoscopy after 3 months. That is 3 months of drug, that's cost, that's 3 months of side effects potential, and that is colonoscopy invasive procedure. This company has invented a blood test that will tell you if you will be a treatment non-responder to Remicade. And they now have taken, they'll be releasing it next week. They'll be releasing it next week, that the disease state that they're tackling, they did substance use disorder, and now they're releasing next week that they're doing autism. And so they will have a diagnostic test that's validated, FDA approved, that you can test for. You can test a child, 6 months, a year old, and you'll be able to tell whether they have the same biomarkers as from an RNA standpoint as other people who we have figured out that have that diagnosis criteria, and then we'll be able to put them into categories. And so for me, I think that this is actually wonderful, because it's going to push back against what the overdiagnosis potential of it. It's going to tell someone that, hey, this person actually they just have delayed speech. And I spoke with a woman who runs a center of she has 70 on staff and takes care of many autistic children at her center now, and she was saying how the early diagnosis, it would help, and knowing the difference between what is somebody who just has a speech delay and somebody who is behaviorally maybe a little bit different, is vastly different than autism. And those people right now, in the beginning, for the first 4 years of their life, are being put into the same group of people.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's I think not everyone necessarily understands how a lot of this stuff works, but anything in the oftentimes in the neurologic, psychologic space, it's really just a clinical diagnosis. So it's just someone that says, "Oh, this child, this adult has this spectrum of syndrome, the symptoms, or this group of symptoms," and like you do a checklist or you watch them or whatever. It's kind of subjective sometimes, and you're like, "Okay, they have this. Okay, autism. There you go." And obviously we're much more complex than that, and so I think and I hope that what we're going to see that's going to be fantastic about genetics and some of these tests and AI and all these things in the future where we might be able to, and hopefully we'll get better at, I mean, certainly will, really being able to work backwards and start to figure out the genetics that are involved so that we can start to group people into different categories and the better we get at it the earlier we can do it the more we can help because as you can imagine autism is probably many different things and so like you said for the kid who maybe has a certain genetics of diagnosis of autism, well maybe then you'll be like, all right, well for this diagnosis of autism with these genetics this medication helps or this treatment helps or this kind of therapy helps versus this other kid who has similar symptoms but it's not autism but it's this other thing helps. And so we can really support the kids much better if you can stop kind of lumping everybody under one thing, and the more specific you can be to them the better. And maybe in the future there's going to be like genetic treatments or I don't know, there are all sorts of possibility in the future once you can actually identify what something is. But for most of what we call let's say autism, we don't know. It's like you just they have some certain symptoms and so you just call it autism and that's how you get your services and kind of everyone gets treated the same. But certainly that's not the case, and I would think it's very likely at this point, and I think that's not super controversial. Like, well, their kids are like fully genetic and it's some sort of genetic condition. There are other kids that has nothing to do with genetics and it's like a fully environmental injury. And then a lot of the kids are kind of probably in the middle where you probably have a certain genetics that makes you more susceptible. And then there's some environmental triggers that kind of push you over the edge or make it weaker or stronger, how much you express it. So I think that's where we are. And ultimately that could be really helpful because, for example, if there is a child who has a severe reaction to or even not like that. If there are kids more susceptible to, let's say, vaccines, if that we turns out, well, maybe that's the kid doesn't get vaccines, or maybe they get fewer, or maybe there's something that you do. So I think that's how it could be super practical in the future. And again, it's not anti-vaccine. It's not anti-autism. It's not anti-anything. It's if we can do something or figure something out to support kids to help them function at their optimal and not create a serious inflammatory reaction on autism or inflammatory bowel disease, chronic disease, any sort of chronic disease, asthma, allergies. Like if we're contributing to that by something that we're doing, that's a good thing to figure out so we don't do it anymore, right? Like what part of that is anti-science? That's what science is for.
Yeah, it's literally what science is for. And so I see great there's tools that are going to become available to us soon if we do this right that could really shift the paradigm. And I think some of these like these diagnostic tests could be that because it not only will do that, it identifies these biomarkers for these different disease states, and then as well we could create therapeutics around those drug targets now, because now those therapeutics can be so specific to that. It might be type 1 autism, type 2 autism. And I do think that it all comes down to some type of inflammation. And like as we learn more about alternative therapies, hyperbarics and just different therapies that can maybe decrease some of that inflammation, we might be able to get somebody in therapy sooner, and in a very in a safe way. And I'm saying when I brought up hyperbarics, I'm doing that because that's a non-pharmacological option that we could take as opposed to a pharmaceutical option. But I think that both of those things can absolutely exist in the future. It's just about knowing when and who to use them for.
Yeah, I think if AI doesn't murder us all, then there's a lot of great use for it. And I like to think positively, and I think that especially in healthcare, there is so much that could be super beneficial for healthcare. Like we're so just there's so little that we know as a human being, and there's so much information out there, and it's changing so quickly, and our genetics are so complicated that this is the area, one of the main areas that like there's just so much potential that if we can study kids with chronic conditions and issues, we can figure out what's different about them and then work our way backwards. and figure out what kind of markers they have early on, who's more at risk for it, why, what can we do? Can we make therapeutics? Can we stop it? Can we watch it moving forward and figure out what, maybe it's not inevitable for this child, but like, this happens and this happens and this happens and then it expresses. Like these are all the things that we absolutely could figure out over time. I mean, there's no reason we wouldn't figure it out if we just continue down that path. So I think, but again, it comes back to you have to be able to acknowledge the problems, right? And that's the first step that we're still sitting in right now. It's like you can't even talk about vaccines having an issue, and if it is contributing, that is the first step. You have to acknowledge that a vaccine causes a problem 1 out of 1,000 times, 1 out of 100,000 times, or whatever it is, and then you can say, okay, when does it cause a problem? Who does it cause a problem to? Why does it cause a problem? All right, let's work our way backwards. What are the genetics in a kid where it's going to cause a problem? All right, let's get the genetic tests on these kids when they're first born, just like we do now, and we do newborn screens. Like, let's do more genetic testing when they're okay. This is the kid that has a genetic issue. Don't give that kid vaccines. Okay, great. The other kids, they're going to be totally fine. All right, give them these. Like that is what we should be aiming for in the future, because our goal is healthy kids. It's not more vaccines. It's not give kids more vaccines. You can give them 1,000 vaccines or 0 vaccines. We want healthy kids. So we have to figure out how to get there, and vaccines maybe continue to be a part of it, and it may not be ultimately, or maybe they're going to be different in the future, or maybe the vaccines that we have today are just unsafe comparatively to how risky the diseases are, and maybe that means we're going to have to change the vaccines to be oral vaccines or a skin prick vaccine, or I don't know what the future holds for them, but maybe it's just a different version that's safer, and so then the risk benefit does work out for them. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the answer is, but you can't answer unless you study it.
Cannabis products are becoming more popular every day. Whether you're looking for the best night's sleep, trying to mitigate daily stress, or just trying to enjoy some laughter with friends, OG Cannabis is the store for you. OG Cannabis has an unbiased approach that is unique and simple. Unlike the competition, they don't sell their own manufactured products, but instead proudly showcase the best vendors across Maine. A dispensary like no other. Come and visit today at 18 American Way, Elliott, Maine. OG Cannabis. Oh, and don't forget to use my promo code, Dr. BeeWell. See you guys there. Giddy up. Yeah, well, I know you've thought about it. I know you've thought about it. The skin prick vaccines or the oral vaccines go back to those, that maybe those could be, those could be safer. That's not a bad point. And reimagining how we do it is why wouldn't we do that, especially if the vaccines aren't working for the current disease state at this time, which I don't think that they are, because that's what my whole thing is. When I try to explain to people, hey, I'm not anti-vax, I am pro-research, and this is just what I would like you to know. And they say to me, oh, well, vaccines are harmless. And I'm like, do you know how much money is paid out to people, every single year due to vaccine injury? It's quite a bit. And, to the tunes of, millions, millions and billions of dollars have been paid out, from these systems. And so, these injuries, they do take place. They do happen. We know that. Any person can go and see that. And so, they say that it's rare, but we should really figure out how, if this is causing, larger disease, larger cascading problems, with the food system, with this is another thing I'd like to ask you about, with the exposure to the technology. Is that another thing that's causing, that's potentially causing some of this? Children are given, an iPad, some of them at 1, 2 years old. Does this have potential causes for, what we're seeing?
Well, I'm sure it does, and I mean, yeah, obviously we talked about vaccines a lot today, but it's not the only thing. There's so many things going on, and that's why. And this is just one. Vaccines are just one small piece of the puzzle. And we have crappy food. We have eating way too much ultra processed food. It's mostly what kids are eating these days, so they're not getting their nutrients. We're surrounded by all sorts of toxins, everything we spray on our bodies, and what's in the air and what's in our water, and then technology. So. Average teen is on screens 7 to 9 hours a day in America. That's nuts. They're not outside. They're not getting exercise. They're not getting sunlight. They're not moving. All those things matter. So of course it matters. And then that's not that's just from the physical aspect. Then they have the mental aspect of the stress and the social media, all of that. So yeah, it's a huge factor. And then you have like the EMFs and the Wi-Fi and all the signals, and they're getting stronger. And everyone's like, "Oh, it's not causing an issue." Well, like at some point, it's going to cause an issue. It's getting stronger. Like you can't just walk into a nuclear bomb. You know, it's like the
This
technology. It's beams of energy, and we're energy, and it's going through us. And obviously, it has some impact on it. And maybe it's not strong enough to really cause any major issues. But certainly for some, they're going to be more sensitive. And as it gets stronger, and we get more of these signals and more of them stronger, closer to you, yeah, I would think that's going to be a health issue, and we're just like we don't acknowledge it at all.
Dude, it's
Um,
just like the water that it's something that for some reason as human beings, when we can't see it physically with our eyes, so because we can't see that our water has has poison in it, and it just looks like regular water, we're like, "Oh, bring it, send it, give me all the chemicals." And it's the
Mhm.
same thing because we can't see the beams of energy, we can't see sound waves, we can't see radiation. Uh, we just assume, "Oh, that can't be affecting me. No way."
Of course it is. I mean, of course it's affecting us. How much? I don't know. I mean, it's affecting us a little, I'm sure, but maybe not enough to cause any damage. But at some point, it will, right? If it's not already. And I'm sure in like 100 years, we're going to look back and think about how stupid we were that we were beaming all this energy through us and walking around with phones in our pockets and, ear pods in our brain and like next to our brain. And we're going to be like, oh, yeah, that probably wasn't the smartest part of humanity. But I mean, these things obviously affect us. Like we're energy, and we know there are many studies of like you put a tower near a school and then a bunch of kids get cancer, or affecting the animals nearby. So of course, sometimes it does affect people, and it's getting stronger and stronger every year, and eventually it's going to probably get to a point where it's going to cause issues. Maybe not. Hopefully not. Hopefully it doesn't cause severe issues. But I don't see how at some point it wouldn't. I think the reality is we're going to start to realize it's causing problems, and hopefully we'll find some solutions around those problems for like keeping us safe. But ultimately, I assume it probably does affect your body and your cells and increase your risk for cancer and mutations and all sorts of things. I mean, I just don't think it's like that severe of an issue yet, but I think we're probably getting there.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's gonna, like you said, it's only gonna get worse because they're gonna make them stronger, and there's just gonna be more, more technology out there, more devices out there. The wearables. That's definitely a thing that people are. Everyone has a wearable now on. Which again, it's because the wearables are awesome. Like they can really help. Yeah, they can be super helpful and like unbelievable at the same time. Um, know I'm a dad. I have a 3-year-old son, and I have a another baby coming in December. And I'm just wondering so what are you doing with your kids, man? How are you with the screens and stuff? How do you limit it, or what's your policy? What do you how are you what are you guys doing in your household for food, and
Yeah.
how just a little bit of advice from one dad to another.
So I mean, I try to prioritize food as much as we can. Where we're spending our money, it's often on food, and we try to get really, as fresh local stuff as possible. So mostly from farmers markets or the place locally that gets their stuff from farmers markets. So it's expensive, more expensive if you get really good stuff. But to me, that's really important. So that's where I tend to spend my money more than anywhere else. And then yeah, screens. I mean, I'm not like hardcore against screens, but I think it's about reasonableness. I think we all watch some screens and cartoons and movies and stuff like that, and I don't think they're inherently bad, especially things that are educational. But I think once you start using that instead of parenting and letting them spend hours and hours a day on screens, you can run into an issue. But on a long trip, on a plane, for half an hour, so you can cook dinner or whatever, all that stuff to me is not a big deal. And I think we should be focusing on the 7 to 9 hours. So I think for the really young kid, they obviously don't need screens, but as they get a little bit older, a little bit I think is okay. And if as long as you keep it within reason, an hour, 2 hours, whatever it is, I think that's fine. When you're talking about like a full day, and if they're on watching a cartoon for 20 minutes or 30 minutes, like I don't think that's going to turn their brain too much. I think we'll be just fine, just like we did. I mean, we watched like Sunday cartoons and this. Like, yeah, we watch screens. So I
For
don't
sure.
think that's a
One
problem.
thing I've been doing and I've been trying to pay attention to is that I like I when he my son, he is 3, and he watches some screens sometimes. He never like an iPad or a phone or whatever, but the TV, right? And so like the TV, I make sure it's a story. I make sure I'm not if it's like I make it something that has a story from to start to end. So it is some of like the older stuff. We do watch like older cartoons and
That we do too. I
some,
think, yeah,
yeah.
learn if there's learning, if there's a moral, a story, I think that's good. You know, like all the research, there's tons of research that you can learn from screens. So screens are not
I was
bad.
raised by TVs, man. I was,
Yeah,
you know, I was raised by TV.
yeah,
Like,
I
come
mean,
on.
Sesame Street's got lots of educational content and actually, from before, a lot of research on it. It's just that you don't learn as well from a screen as a person. We know that. So you shouldn't plop them in there and assume they're going to just learn how to read, but you can still get a lot of education from an educational program. So again, I don't think that's a problem. To me, it's about balance and it's about thinking about what's the big issues. And then I would say the harder, more important thing is about giving a kid a phone. I just I would not give them a internet phone at a young age. I think that's a very bad idea. I think we should be hopefully at a point now where we're just going to stop doing that. I don't have any problem with someone who, for safety reasons, like I want my kid to have a phone. I want them to be able to call me. There are tons of options now for a
Yeah.
non-internet phone, and I have no problem giving my kids that as they get older, so they can just have it in their bag or whatever with just phone numbers. They should not have access to the internet. They shouldn't have access to social media, not till their late teen years at least. And I think we just need to go back to that, and I think that's fine. Like safety, okay, fine. Like I don't. We have the technology, so I guess it's good. You can call if you need to. You can get picked up, whatever. That's fine by me. But you don't need the internet. They don't need to be scrolling, and they don't need to know all the crazy, horrible things going on in the world at all times. So that's where I would put a hard line. Like kids are not they're not getting an internet phone until they're much older. I can promise you that much. But they're still young, so I don't have that issue.
That's giddy up. I can
Oh,
promise you that over at the Ivo household, we're I'm promising it too, man. It's the internet phones, and you want what's really cool about that is like we figured that out pretty quickly. You know that the phones, the internet phones, are not good for children, and like like even the kids. I'm 34. I have a my friends who are 24 and 25. Kids who even grew up in it more. These guys are ditching their phones and going back to flip phones, themselves. And I'm like, I'm not worried about the way that you're going to raise your kids one bit. Like you guys already
yeah,
get it. So we came out of it pretty quickly in how
I
much
think
we were
so.
like, whoa, this is bad. And as society, we are starting to, I think some people will get left behind and some people will get lost in it. And that will suck. But as a society as a whole, I think we're realizing that and starting to reel it back.
I mean, we for sure are. There are countries that are reeling back phones from schools. There are states that are doing it, local, areas that are doing it. So I think as a I guess as a culture, we've we've decided like this is bad, and I think that's a good thing because it is bad, and I think we were able to do it because it's so obvious, like it's so immediate, and so clear. We have this like massive anxiety problem and massive stress problem, and just like honestly, like how can you possibly focus in school if you can scroll on your phone? Like you're not thinking about math when there's like a bomb going off in some other country. You're like or your friends like posting something about you in school. Like you're not gonna be paying attention. It's hard enough for adults to like not doom scroll or look at their phone. Like how are you gonna do that at school? So obviously you need to pay attention, and if you give kids something they could just scroll all day, they're not going to. So it's not a very hard uh, thing to think that that's going to cause a problem. And again, it's not like screens are evil. It's just you can't focus if you have it with you. You just have to remove it. So I think there's no reason we can't do that, and we aren't doing it, and I think that's good. And I think as long as enough people continue to do that, then it's not the weird thing, and kids will do it because I think that's the hard part is when like you're the only one and your kid's the only one without a screen, and then they really want one because all their friends have it, and you can lay the law down, but obviously it's harder and harder as they get older to be the only one to do something, and then of course they're gonna as they get older be able to figure out how to do it themselves, so you can't really manage that anyways. So I think it's just more about we got to make it normal, and I think we are normalizing it so that way kids are okay with just having a flip phone and don't feel like they need to be on social media, and I do think that's happening in the last 2 or 3 years. So I think that's a very positive step for mental health. In a we haven't really talked about it, but another topic for another day. But like a huge problem, the mental health, and then that's a huge issue with all of our health. But at least that's one part that's a little better.
Yeah, and you mean that with the kids' mental health is, I mean, the adults' mental
Everybody,
health
but
is,
yeah, kids for sure.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, dude, it is everybody, and I know we are getting almost time here, and I hope that we can cut, I can have you back on the program, sometime because it would be wonderful to explore some of some deeper some deeper stuff that's going on with the kids of the kids of our nation. Yeah, man.
Yeah.
What about the sleepovers? I know that's a thing that most people are saying like they're not going to allow their kids to do sleepovers in the future. Is that a thing for you guys?
Yeah, it's so interesting because I never thought about it. I don't remember what triggered me posting about it. Somebody was talking about it and then I did post about it. Um I think I read something like, most people are not doing sleepovers anymore, and I was like confused by that because like I remember doing it and it was super fun and like that everybody looked forward to it. My wife was like, yeah, like why would we? Or you know how it came up because my kid was talking about like, oh, when can I go over to such and such's house, right? And like, I think it was 5 at that point. And we were talking about it, and I was like, oh, I don't know, like when did you start doing sleepovers? And I don't know exactly when, but like maybe in the early teens, right? And it, when I posted about like, oh, what age should you do it? Like most people said never, and I was surprised, right? And I didn't realize that people had so many crazy stories about sleepovers and had such a level of concern. And I'm not sure whether that level of concern is warranted or whether there's just a lot of concern because of what we hear and read about the worst possible case scenarios that I mean certainly do happen. But I think there's
For
a lot
sure.
more attention and media around the crazy horrible stories, and maybe it's not as bad as we think. I don't know. I don't know the answer because I didn't even think it was a problem until I posted about it. But there's a lot more people that think more strongly about it than I had ever imagined. So I don't know, but I'm not like super opposed to it. I would certainly wouldn't have a problem doing it at my house if people wanted to have people here and maybe someone that you really trust. But then again, everyone's like, oh, but it's the people that you trust that it's most likely to happen. So I don't know. Confusing. I think it's a confusing topic, but I'm still not like totally opposed to it. I don't know.
Yeah, it is. It is a confusing topic. It was integral to my childhood, integral to who I am. I think as a human being, you need that time away from your parents. You need that time to be independent, and you can get that in other ways. But I think sleepovers with buddies is a pretty cool way to do that. And if you can do it in a good, controlled way, I think that's a giddy up. And you better believe it. Like my parents used to just drop me off wherever. I'll probably always like go into the house, and
Hmm.
they'll know who I am. And yeah. I do hear that it's people that you trust, but I also know that if you're a strong, a strong presence, a strong, whether that's a female or a male, and you're a strong parent, and you make that known to to people, they're not gonna. Yeah, there's a less likely chance that they're gonna mess with your children.
Yeah, I think that's true, certainly, but I think, it's hard because I guess, everyone thinks that it's not gonna happen to them or not happen to their
Yeah,
kid, and, you never know if it's someone that's, like, your best friend or a cousin or whatever, like, you just don't know, I
you never
guess, and
know,
so
dude.
I think that's just hard because that's kind of the mentality that people took when they were talking to me. It didn't happen to me. I mean, I'm lucky. I never had a problem. I never thought about it. I went to plenty of, sleepovers. It wasn't a thing, for me, but I mean, I guess for other people it is. So I don't know. I don't think there's an easy answer. I think you just have to do it at your comfort level. I'm still, fairly comfortable with it personally, and I think if it's a good, one of my kids' good friends, parents that I know, something like that, I would probably still be okay with it. But I probably wouldn't be very comfortable if like I didn't know them. And I think also the comfort might increase as they get older. The younger they are, probably the more susceptible they would be to some sort of situation they don't know how to deal with. But I think if they get older, it would be less of a concern, but no, there's always the concern. So I don't know. I think all these things are personal decisions that you have to come to based on how concerned you are and how strict you want to be about these things. But ultimately, bad stuff does happen, and you have to kind of decide, how controlling you want to be versus how much you want to allow them to kind of get out there. And I think there's also something to be said, like you said, for letting them kind of live and be out there and make some mistakes in the world. So I think that we have to kind of balance having too much control with not enough control, and it's not simple for sure.
Yeah, dude, it's not easy. None of this stuff is easy, but it's probably not supposed to be because any type of growth is going to be uncomfortable and going to be, difficult. The only way is through. So we got to go through it.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, brother, where can my audience where can they find you?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on. You can find me on Instagram or X at Dr. Joel Gator, or the book Between a Shot and a Hard Place. You can find that on Amazon or theshotbook.com, and also has been really popular lately. My Substack, Between a Shot and a Hard Place. A lot of people have a lot of questions about vaccines, and I've been writing about vaccines and other kid health stuff, and it's been doing great. So you can find me on Substack too.
Awesome, guys. Yeah, seriously, like I said, I was lost in it a little bit because everyone was either, super pro or super anti, and I couldn't get like a grounded opinion on it. That's when I found Joel, Dr. Warsh, the Gator, giddy up. So I appreciate him. So, guys, please check him out. Follow along, and we'll definitely have him on again. And until next time, giddy up.